Do you suffer from a profound sense of world-weary despair and nihilism, overwhelmed by the complexity of life? Do you feel that we are living in a violent age of rage, disharmony, and disequilibrium, on the precipice of civil war? Do you feel trapped in a broken economic model that's trashing the living world and threatens the lives of our descendants? A model that excludes billions of people while making a handful unimaginably rich, then sorts us into winners and losers, and blames the losers for their misfortune. Do you feel left out, left behind, and filled with inchoate vulnerability? That the unique promise of American democracy of opportunity for all, not to just survive, but to thrive and get ahead, is on life support? That ubiquitous and rancorous cacophony is drowning out all reasonable, rational, and civil discourse? And that our interaction with each other has become so polarized and tribal that you are filled with a sense of dread, or worse, apathy, at the possibility of voicing reasonable dissent? Do you feel hopeless and defeated to prevent the sixth mass extinction through the well-documented existential threat of climate change, while the world blithely allows the slow, systematic matricide of Mother Earth, tortured and slowly suffocated by a blanket of CO2 at the hands of her own ungrateful children? And finally, do you feel that democracy in America is teetering on a knife's edge, between maintaining a democratic republic or succumbing to the tidal wave of fascist authoritarianism that appears to be engulfing numerous nations globally?
If any one of us is illegal, then we all are illegal. So keep it up. If any of you get arrested and go to jail, I'm prepared to get arrested and go to jail with you. The jails of America are not large enough to hold all of us. The vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is the most powerful non-violent tool that we have in a democracy.
Ever become bitter or hostile? We shouldn't take anything personally. This is politics. This is the business. This is the job that some of us ask for. Sometimes we get bruised, sometimes we get knocked down, but we have the will, the courage, the ability, and the capacity to get up, to find a way to get in the way.
The No Kings protests were nationwide demonstrations held on June 14, 2025, organized by groups like the 50501 movement to protest what they considered the authoritarian actions and expansion of presidential power by the Trump administration. The name reflects the protest's core message, that the U.S. is a democracy, not a monarchy, and that the people reject such authoritarianism. The protests coincided with a military parade celebrating the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary and President Trump's 79th birthday, but were primarily driven by concerns over actions like increased immigration enforcement, deployment of federal troops, and alleged assaults on civil rights and the environment.
Immigrants are welcome here! No fear! Immigrants are welcome here! We want ICE off our streets! We want justice! We want peace! We want ICE off our streets!
First and foremost, it feels good to be together in community and shout about what's happening and to speak truth to power. We will not be silenced. We have to stand up and speak out about what's happening in this country. To our immigrant communities, we need to tax the rich.
No secret police in the USA.
Here's the big question. As Donald Trump takes the wrecking ball of chaos and anarchy to our hallowed American democracy, what does he intend to construct in its place? For tyranny and anarchy are never far apart. For the answer to that compelling question, one has to look no further than the Christo-Fascist Manifesto, Project 2025, essentially the imposition of a reactionary patriarchal Christian flavor of Muslim Sharia law, with ostensibly unlimited imperial powers granted to the executive branch. But the larger question is, What are you personally willing to sacrifice, if need be financially, and yes, physically, to protect and defend American democracy from foreign, and now predominantly domestic enemies, as enshrined in the sacrosanct U.S. Constitution? If you are neutral or just silent in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor, as the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And are you able and willing to take it to the streets with fellow Americans in peaceful, nonviolent demonstrations to pursue the ultimate triumph over Trump's tyranny, for however long it may take? Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. On January 20th, 2025, as I witnessed the ominous, excruciating spectacle of the coronation of Emperor Donald Trump, the self-anointed monarch of America, surrounded by obsequious, sycophantic courtiers and courtesans, other assorted adoring political prostitutes, and technocratic oligarchs, like some adapted dark Shakespearean farce in a reality TV dystopic miniseries. I was reminded of another day of notorious infamy, December 7th, 1941, when the United States of America was surreptitiously attacked by the Empire of Japan, and resultant America's unfledging commitment, along with the other democratic nations of the world, to confront the worldwide threat of the domination of fascist totalitarianism. The Second World War, the most devastating and destructive war in the history of the world in terms of loss of life and sheer depravity. In the words of Winston Churchill, "United we stand, divided we fall. Divided, the dark age returns. United we can save and guide the world." Just as December 7th, 1941 is an infamously symbolic date in America as a cautionary echo of history, so it is now with November 5th, 2024, where the dire consequences of another term as president by Donald Trump are no longer some overly alarmist abstraction, but that the unthinkable has become the sobering reality. Essentially an internal, self-inflicted, slow-motion Pearl Harbor, the culmination of incremental and cumulative damage done over 4 decades of a calculated, subversive, radical right, neoliberal assault on American liberal democratic ideals. And now in 2025, codified in the radical right, Christian nationalist, neo-fascist manifesto, Project 2025. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana. Now, that the shock and period of mourning is over, it is time for an unflinching, sustained resistance to the impending autocracy by whatever means necessary. It is time to take it to the streets. Never let us forget that the genesis of this great American experiment of democracy was forged in the crucible of righteous populist indignation by common, but not ordinary citizens just like yourself, to revolt against another tyrannical monarch. Every revolution begins with Citizen Rebel Zero. To paraphrase President Roosevelt on December 8, 1941, no matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated coup d'etat, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the American people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves and the Constitution to the utmost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. November 5th enhances the potential for irreconcilable political conflict, perhaps devolving into violence by radical right civilian paramilitary. There is no blinking at the fact that the right to live in a free and open democratic society is in grave existential danger and will force each of us to have to choose between living in a democracy or under fascism. With confidence in the American democratic institutions and the rule of law, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph of a free and fair democracy again. That said, now what? By now, because the percipient critical thinking among us are acutely aware of the emerging perverse political landscape, This film will not focus on the well-documented potential for the massive political and social chaos of another Trump administration. Rather, it will endeavor to proffer the following. How did this happen? And where do we go from here? But first, before we can offer cogent explanations and execute realistic solutions, we need to acknowledge and agree on some basic, unsettling assumptions, formerly known as facts. This now is the new normal. Return ticket to normalcy, canceled, and we have met the enemy, and the enemy is us. And it's time to disabuse ourselves that this is just a transient, erratic swing of the pendulum, which has swung so far to the right that it's now stuck. The inherent moral hazard of greed and the naked pursuit of power are hard-coded into the human species. The oligarchs will not go quietly into the night. We can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. Louis D. Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice. It is long past the time for a complete overhaul and recalibration of political strategy by the opposition. No more playing defense. Hope is a tactic, not a viable strategy. No more showing up to a knife fight with a dull butter knife when the other side is packing an AR-15. The best defense is a strong, relentless offense. To not surrender to fear and complexity, but rather proactively embrace the daunting challenge we face. In other words, game on. And finally, the current political predicament is the result of over 4 decades of the execution of a comprehensive master plan, essentially a cabal, by the radical right faction of the Republican Party to disrupt and, if possible, destroy long-held progressive ideals and principles that American democracy was founded upon, but are perceived as a threat to the continued accumulation of massive wealth. History records the genesis of the strategic execution of the master plan by the neo-fascist libertarian regime, with the rise of economic and political domination of neoliberalism, and the fusion of Christian nationalism with the election of Ronald Reagan as president in 1980. We must endeavor to persevere and be prepared for a long, possibly decades, contentious, and potentially violent confrontation with the opposition. Positive change will require patience, but more importantly, fierce fortitude and a willingness for shared sacrifice. How did this happen? History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Mark Twain, 1874. How did we get here? To better understand the social phenomenon of the improbable ascension of the demagogue, the sybaritic Philistine Donald Trump, and the so-called Make America Great Again or MAGA movement, and its cultural and political cultish following, it is instructive to study how dictators in relatively recent history have managed to gain absolute and enduring power over their respective social and political constituencies, and more significantly, the zeitgeist. The most cogent and relevant example, which echoes and indeed rhymes with recent modern history with the most congruence, is the rise of Adolf Hitler and the oppressive autocratic political movement of Nazism in the 4th decade of the 20th century. What follows is an exegesis with many references from 2 esteemed literary historians. Aldous Huxley, from his nonfiction Brave New World Revisited, specifically his most prescient chapter, Propaganda Under a Dictatorship, written after World War II in 1958, following his novel Brave New World in 1932, of a profoundly prophetic cautionary parable of the impact of technology on the society. And Timothy Snyder's best-selling fearless and socially compelling nonfiction, On Tyranny in 2017, just after the first election of Donald Trump 1.0 as President of the United States. Hitler's dictatorship differed in one fundamental point from all its predecessors in history. It was the first dictatorship in the present period of modern technical development, a dictatorship which made complete use of all technical means for the domination of its own country. Through technical devices like the radio and the loudspeaker, 80 million people were deprived of independent thought. It was thereby possible to subject them to the will of one man. Earlier dictators needed highly qualified assistants even at the lowest level, men who could think and act independently. The totalitarian system in the period of modern technical development can dispense with such men. Thanks to modern methods of communication, it is possible to mechanize the lower leadership. As a result of this, there has arisen the new type of the uncritical recipient of orders. The parallel we find here is Trump's mastery of media domination of social consciousness, through often outlandish and easily disprovable lies, designed to get and keep attention through shock value, while at the same time gratifying his insatiable narcissistic ego, monopolizing eyeball-time attention on mainstream media, and most especially internet social networks like X, formerly known as Twitter. Since Hitler's day, the armory of technical devices at the disposal of the would-be dictator has been considerably enlarged. As well as the quaintly antiquated radio, the loudspeaker, the moving picture camera, and the rotary press, the contemporary propagandist can make use of television to broadcast the image as well as the voice of his client, and now, predominantly, the ubiquitous internet. Thanks to technological progress, George Orwell's Big Brother can now be almost as omnipresent as God. This sea change, which amounts to a technocracy, creates a radical pace of change which emotionally overwhelms and profoundly disorients people, making them even more vulnerable to herd poisoning. It is contended that this accelerated rate of technological and social change leaves people disconnected and suffering from shattering stress and disorientation, or future shocked, which author Alvin Toffler stated that the majority of social problems are symptoms of future shock. In his discussion of the components of such shock, he prophetically popularized the term information overload, or TMI, too much information, never more relevant than today. While the social structural consequences of techno-shock are essentially the same as future shock, they differ considerably in significant ways. Techno-shock picks up from where future shock of the evolution to a super-industrial society left off circa 1960s, to a society of a highly accelerated non-industrial information age, fundamentally and now indivisibly essential to the structural function and operation of contemporary society, an ostensible technocracy, and today, the primary force vector, and yes, perpetrator of techno-shock is unfettered, uncurated feral social networks like Facebook and X. In the contemporary perversion of what we call democracy today, it breeds an addictive form of inverted totalitarianism, where democracy has become subordinate to and the handmaiden of the oligarchs of neoliberal capitalism through the promulgation of social networks. Like someone who is trapped in a radical religious cult, in this case, democracy is being held captive by a white male-dominated patriarchal Christian nationalist cult that worships only power and wealth, essentially as discussed in Neil Postman's 1992 book, Technopoly. Television was Alpha Vector Zero for the delivery of toxic technoshock, or Future Shock 2.0 and later, circa 2000, metastasizing into Omnipresent Web 2.0, known as participatory web and social web, which refers to websites that emphasize user-generated content of social networks, ease of use, participatory culture, and interoperability and compatibility with other products, systems, and devices for end users. Since Hitler's day, a great deal of work has been carried out in those fields of applied psychology and neurology, which are the special province of the propagandist, the indoctrinator, and the brainwasher. In the past, these specialists in the art of changing people's minds were empiricists. By a method of trial and error, they had worked out a number of techniques and procedures, which they used very effectively without, however, knowing precisely why they were effective. Today, the art of mind control is in process of becoming a science. The practitioners of this science know what they are doing and why. They are guided in their work by theories and hypotheses solidly established on a massive foundation of experimental evidence. To be a leader means to be able to move the masses. Hitler's aim was first to move the masses, and then, having pried them loose from their traditional loyalties and moralities, to impose upon them, with the hypnotized consent of the majority, a new authoritarian order of his own devising. Hitler had a deep respect for the Catholic Church and the Jesuit order, not because of their Christian doctrine, but because of the machinery they have elaborated and controlled, their hierarchical system, their extremely clever tactics, their knowledge of human nature, and their wise use of human weaknesses in ruling over believers. Ecclesiasticism without Christianity, the discipline of a monastic rule, not for God's sake or in order to achieve personal salvation, but for the sake of the state and for the greater glory and power of the demagogue turned leader. This was the goal toward which the systematic moving of the masses was to lead. And so it goes with Trump, a notorious hedonic heathen, pandering to the essentially white religious right Christo-fascists on a purely transactional basis to gain the considerable support of the true believers who were willing to transcend Trump's notorious moral ambiguities to secure their Christo-theocratic agenda, including banning in any form, at any stage of pregnancy of an abortion, even in cases of rape, incest, or saving the life of the mother. The first principle from both Hitler and Trump started was a value judgment. The masses are utterly contemptible. They are incapable of abstract thinking and uninterested in any fact outside the circle of their immediate experience. Their behavior is determined, not by knowledge and reason, but by feelings and unconscious drives. It is in these drives and feelings that the roots of their positive as well as their negative attitudes are implanted. To be successful, a propagandist must learn how to manipulate these instincts and emotions. The driving force which has brought about the most tremendous revolutions on this earth has never been a body of scientific teaching which has gained power over the masses, but always a devotion which has inspired them, and often a kind of hysteria which has urged them into action. Whoever wishes to win over the masses must know the key that will open the door of their hearts. In post-Freudian jargon, of their unconscious. Hitler and Trump made their strongest appeal to those members of the lower middle classes who had been ruined by the Great Depression of 1929 and by the Great Recession of 2008 respectively, and all over again the inflation of post-COVID pandemic years of 7% annual inflation. The masses were these bewildered, frustrated, and chronically anxious millions. To make them more mass-like, more homogeneously subhuman, he assembled them by the thousands in vast halls and arenas where individuals could lose their personal identity, even their elementary humanity, and be merged with the crowd. A man or woman makes direct contact with society in two ways: as a member of some familial, professional, or religious group, or as a member of a crowd. Groups are capable of being as moral and intelligent as the individuals who form them. A crowd is chaotic, has no purpose of its own, and is capable of anything except intelligent action and realistic thinking. Assembled in a crowd, people lose their powers of reasoning and their capacity for moral choice. Their suggestibility is increased to the point where they cease to have any judgment or will of their own. They become very excitable. They lose all sense of individual or collective responsibility. They are subject to sudden accesses of rage, enthusiasm, and panic. In a word, a man in a crowd behaves as though he had swallowed a large dose of some powerful intoxicant. He is a victim of what I have called herd poisoning. Like alcohol, herd poison is an active, extroverted drug. The crowd-intoxicated individual escapes from responsibility, intelligence, and morality into a kind of frantic, animal mindlessness. In American history, there is no more cogent example of mob manipulation to commit a treasonous, violent assault on American democracy, the rule of law, and the U.S. Constitution than the attack on the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021, incited and led by Donald Trump to violently overthrow the U.S. government. During his long career as an agitator, Hitler had studied the effects of herd poison and had learned how to exploit them for his own purposes. He had discovered that the orator can appeal to those hidden forces which motivate men's actions much more effectively than can the writer. Reading is a private, not a collective activity. The writer speaks only to individuals, sitting by themselves in a state of normal sobriety. The orator speaks to masses of individuals, already well primed with herd poison. They are at his mercy, and if he knows his business, he can do what he likes with them. 20 years before Madison Avenue embarked upon motivational research, Hitler was systematically exploring and exploiting the secret fears and hopes, the cravings, anxieties, and frustrations of the German masses. It is by manipulating hidden forces that the advertising experts induce us to buy their wares, a toothpaste, a brand of cigarettes, a political candidate. And it is by appealing to the same hidden forces, and to others too dangerous for Madison Avenue to meddle with, that Hitler induced the German masses to buy themselves a Führer, an insane philosophy, and the Second World War. Unlike the masses, intellectuals have a taste for rationality and an interest in facts. Their critical habit of mind makes them resistant to the kind of propaganda that works so well on the majority. Among the masses, instinct is supreme, and from instinct comes faith. While the healthy common folk instinctively close their ranks to form a community of the people under a leader, intellectuals run this way and that. With them, one cannot make history. They cannot be used as elements composing a community. Intellectuals are the kind of people who demand evidence and are shocked by logical inconsistencies and fallacies. They regard oversimplification as the original sin of the mind, and have no use for the slogans, the unqualified assertions and sweeping generalizations, which are the propagandist's stock in trade. All effective propaganda, Hitler wrote, and Trump, as most finely honed sociopaths instinctively know, must be confined to a few bare necessities, and then must be expressed in a few stereotyped formulas. Fortunately for the world, Trump, not particularly bright but nonetheless like many charlatans, was endowed with some serious NYC chutzpah and street shrewd. And as also can be said of cockroaches, a hard-coded, hard-shell self-preservation instinct. These stereotyped formulas must be constantly repeated, for only constant repetition will finally succeed in imprinting an idea upon the memory of a crowd. Philosophy teaches us to feel uncertain about the things that seem to us self-evident. Propaganda, on the other hand, teaches us to accept as self-evident matters about which it would be reasonable to suspend our judgment or to feel doubt. The aim of the demagogue is to create social coherence under his own leadership. History does not repeat, but it does instruct. As the Founding Fathers debated our Constitution, they took instruction from the history they knew. Concerned that the democratic republic they envisioned would collapse, they contemplated the descent of ancient democracies and republics into oligarchy and empire. As they knew, Aristotle warned that inequality brought instability, while Plato believed that demagogues exploited free speech to install themselves as tyrants. In founding a democratic republic upon law and establishing a system of checks and balances, the Founding Fathers sought to avoid the evil that they, like the ancient philosophers, called tyranny. They had in mind the usurpation of power by a single individual or group, or the circumvention of law by rulers for their own benefit. Much of the succeeding political debate in the United States has concerned the problem of tyranny within American society, over slaves and women, for example. It is thus a primary American tradition to consider history when our political order seems imperiled. If we worry today that the American experiment is threatened by tyranny, we can follow the example of the Founding Fathers and contemplate the history of other democracies and republics. The good news is that we can draw upon more recent and relevant examples than ancient Greece and Rome. The bad news is that the history of modern democracy is also one of decline and fall. Since the American colonies declared their independence from a British monarchy that the founders deemed tyrannical, European history has seen three major democratic moments. After the First World War in 1918, after the Second World War in 1945, and after the end of communism in 1989. Many of the democracies founded at these junctures failed, in circumstances that in some important respects resemble our own. History can familiarize, and it can warn. In the late 19th century, just as in the late 20th century, the expansion of global trade generated expectations of progress. In the early 20th century, as in the early 21st, these hopes were challenged by new visions of mass politics in which a leader or a party claimed to directly represent the will of the people. European democracies collapsed into right-wing authoritarianism and fascism in the 1920s and 30s. The Communist Soviet Union, established in 1922, extended its model into Europe in the 1940s. The European history of the 20th century shows us that societies can break, democracies can fall, ethics can collapse, and ordinary men can find themselves standing over death pits with guns in their hands. It would serve us well today to understand why. Both fascism and communism were responses to globalization, to the real and perceived inequalities it created, and the apparent helplessness of the democracies in addressing them. Fascists rejected reason in the name of will, denying objective truth in favor of a glorious myth articulated by leaders who claim to give voice to the people. They put a face on globalization, arguing that its complex challenges were the result of a conspiracy against the nation. Fascists ruled for a decade or two, leaving behind an intact intellectual legacy that grows more relevant by the day. Communists ruled for longer, for nearly 7 decades in the Soviet Union, and more than 4 decades in much of Eastern Europe. They proposed rule by a disciplined party elite, with a monopoly on reason that would guide society toward a certain future according to supposedly fixed laws of history. We might be tempted to think that our democratic heritage automatically protects us from such threats. This is a misguided reflex. In fact, the precedent set by the founders demands that we examine history to understand the deep sources of tyranny and to consider the proper responses to it. Americans today are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, or communism in the 20th century. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. Now is a good time to do so. But for those readers of history who may fear the horrors of another American Civil War, I would suggest that you're too late. We are already in the midst of a civil war, a cyber civil war, for the soul of America and humanity, where the weapons of choice are not muskets but memes, in some cases waged by the implementation of very powerful automated and autonomous algorithms of computer code generated by unregulated artificial intelligence, or AI. Hitler's Third Reich provides the historical precedent for the great efficacy of propaganda in waging a bloodless coup d'etat, with the German landmark propaganda film Triumph of the Will. The 1935 German Nazi propaganda film, directed, produced, edited, and co-written by Leni Riefenstahl. Adolf Hitler commissioned the film and served as an unofficial executive producer. His name appears in the opening titles. It demonstrates the highly persuasive power of visual media, a portent of modern-day propaganda, now orders of magnitude more powerful and effective through the omnipresent internet, most especially social networks like Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter, in particular owned, with highly partisan radical right curation, by Elon Musk, who contributed about $250 million toward the re-election campaign of Donald Trump, thanks to the 2010 Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission verdict by the highly partisan conservative U.S. Supreme Court. A landmark decision of the United States Supreme Court regarding campaign finance laws, in which the court found that laws restricting the political spending of corporations and unions are inconsistent with the free speech clause of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Citizens United's dubious precedent opened the floodgates of obscenely unlimited corrosive money for campaigns by Trump and radical right neoliberal Christo-fascists. So much for adherence to the laws, avoiding even the appearance of conflict of interest. Where do we go from here? Do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want, and then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do. Anticipatory obedience is a political tragedy. Perhaps rulers did not initially know that citizens were willing to compromise this value or that principle. Perhaps a new regime did not at first have the direct means of influencing citizens one way or another. After the German elections of 1932, which permitted Adolf Hitler to form a government, or the Czechoslovak elections of 1946, where communists were victorious, the next crucial step was anticipatory obedience. Because enough people in both cases voluntarily extended their services to the new leaders, Nazis and communists alike realized that they could move quickly toward a full regime change. The first heedless acts of conformity could not then be reversed. Defend institutions. It is institutions that help us to preserve decency. They need our help as well. Do not speak of our institutions unless you make them yours by acting on their behalf. Institutions do not protect themselves. They fall one after the other unless each is defended from the beginning. So choose an institution you care about, a court, a newspaper, a law, a labor union, and take its side. We tend to assume that institutions will automatically maintain themselves against even the most direct attacks. This was the very mistake that some German Jews made about Hitler and the Nazis after they had formed a government. Beware the one-party state. The parties that remade states and suppressed rivals were not omnipotent from the start. They exploited a historic moment to make political life impossible for their opponents. So support the multi-party system and defend the rules of democratic elections. Vote in local and state elections while you can. Consider running for office. The symbols of today enable the reality of tomorrow. Notice the swastikas and the other signs of hate. Do not look away, and do not get used to them. Remove them yourself and set an example for others to do so. Life is political, not because the world cares about how you feel, but because the world reacts to what you do. The minor choices we make are themselves a kind of vote, making it more or less likely that free and fair elections will be held in the future. In the politics of the everyday, our words and gestures, or their absence, count very much. A few extreme, and less extreme, examples from the 20th century can show us how. In the Soviet Union under the rule of Joseph Stalin, prosperous farmers were portrayed on propaganda posters as pigs, a dehumanization that in a rural setting clearly suggests slaughter. This was in the early 1930s, as the Soviet state tried to master the countryside and extract capital for crash industrialization. The peasants who had more land or livestock than others were the first to lose what they had. Remember professional ethics. When political leaders set a negative example, professional commitments to just practice become more important. It is hard to subvert a rule of law state without lawyers or to hold show trials without judges. Authoritarians need obedient civil servants, and concentration camp directors seek businessmen interested in cheap labor. Before the Second World War, a man named Hans Frank was Hitler's personal lawyer. After Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Frank became the Governor-General of occupied Poland, a German colony where millions of Jews and other Polish citizens were murdered. He once boasted that there were not enough trees to make the paper for posters that would be needed to announce all of the executions. Frank claimed that law was meant to serve the race, and so what seemed good for the race was therefore the law. With arguments like this, German lawyers could convince themselves that laws and rules were there to serve their projects of conquest and destruction rather than to hinder them. Be wary of paramilitaries. When the men with guns who have always claimed to be against the system start wearing uniforms and marching with torches and pictures of a leader, the end is nigh. When the pro-leader paramilitary and the official police and military intermingle, the end has come. Most governments, most of the time, seek to monopolize violence. If only the government can legitimately use force, and this use is constrained by law, then the forms of politics that we take for granted become possible. It is impossible to carry out democratic elections, try cases at court, design and enforce laws, or indeed manage any of the other quiet business of government when agencies beyond the state also have access to violence. For just this reason, people and parties who wish to undermine democracy and the rule of law create and fund violent organizations that involve themselves in politics. Such groups can take the form of a paramilitary wing of a political party, like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, the personal bodyguard of a particular politician, or apparently spontaneous citizens' initiatives, which usually turn out to have been organized by a party or its leader. Armed groups first degrade a political order and then transform it. Be reflective if you must be armed. If you carry a weapon in public service, may God bless you and keep you. But know that evils of the past involved policemen and soldiers finding themselves one day doing irregular things. Be ready to say no. Authoritarian regimes usually include a special riot police force whose task is to disperse citizens who seek to protest, and a secret state police force whose assignments include the murder of dissenters or others designated as enemies. And indeed, we find forces of the latter kind deeply involved in the great atrocities of the 20th century, such as the Great Terror in the Soviet Union of 1937-38, and the Holocaust of European Jews perpetrated by Nazi Germany in 1941-45. Stand out. Someone has to. It is easy to follow along. It can feel strange to do or say something different. But without that unease, there is no freedom. Remember Rosa Parks. The moment you set an example, the spell of the status quo is broken, and others will follow. After the Second World War, Europeans, Americans, and others created myths of righteous resistance to Hitler. In the 1930s, however, the dominant attitudes had been accommodation and admiration. By 1940, most Europeans had made their peace with the seemingly irresistible power of Nazi Germany. Influential Americans such as Charles Lindbergh opposed war with the Nazis under the slogan, "America First." It is those who were considered exceptional, eccentric, or even insane in their own time, those who did not change when the world around them did, whom we remember and admire today. Well before the Second World War, numerous European states had abandoned democracy for some form of right-wing authoritarianism. Italy became the first fascist state in 1922 and was a military ally of Germany. Be kind to our language. Avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. Think up your own way of speaking, even if only to convey that thing you think everyone is saying. Make an effort to separate yourself from the internet. Read books. Victor Klemperer, a literary scholar of Jewish origin, turned his philological training against Nazi propaganda. He noticed how Hitler's language rejected legitimate opposition. The people always meant some people and not others. The president uses the word in this way. Encounters were always struggles, the president says winning, and any attempt by free people to understand the world in a different way was defamation of the leader, or, as the president puts it, libel. Politicians in our times feed their cliches to television, where even those who wish to disagree repeat them. Television purports to challenge political language by conveying images, but the succession from one frame to another can hinder a sense of resolution. Everything happens fast, but nothing actually happens. Each story on televised news is breaking until it is displaced by the next one. So we are hit by wave upon wave, but never see the ocean. Believe in truth, not magical thinking. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power, because there is no basis upon which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. The biggest wallet pays for the most blinding lights. You submit to tyranny when you renounce the difference between what you want to hear and what is actually the case. This renunciation of reality can feel natural and pleasant, but the result is your demise as an individual, and thus the collapse of any political system that depends upon individualism. As observers of totalitarianism, such as Victor Klemperer noticed, truth dies in 4 modes, all of which we have just witnessed. The first mode is the open hostility to verifiable reality, which takes the form of presenting inventions and lies as if they were facts. The president does this at a high rate and at a fast pace. One attempt during the 2016 campaign to track his utterances found that 78% of his factual claims were false. This proportion is so high that it makes the correct assertions seem like unintended oversights on the path toward total fiction. Demeaning the world as it is begins the creation of a fictional counterworld. The second mode is shamanistic incantation. As Klemperer noted, the fascist style depends upon endless repetition, designed to make the fictional plausible and the criminal desirable. The systematic use of nicknames such as Lion Ted and Crooked Hillary displaced certain character traits that might more appropriately have been affixed to the president himself. Yet through blunt repetition over Twitter, our president managed the transformation of individuals into stereotypes that people then spoke aloud. At rallies, the repeated chants of "build that wall" and "lock her up" did not describe anything that the president had specific plans to do, but their very grandiosity established a connection between him and his audience. The next mode is magical thinking, or the open embrace of contradiction. The president's campaign involved the promises of cutting taxes for everyone, eliminating the national debt, and increasing spending on both social policy and national defense. These promises mutually contradict. It is as if a farmer said he were taking an egg from the hen house, boiling it whole and serving it to his wife, and also poaching it and serving it to his children, and then returning it to the hen unbroken, and then watching as the chick hatches. Accepting untruth of this radical kind requires a blatant abandonment of reason. Investigate. Figure things out for yourself. Spend more time with long articles. Subsidize investigative journalism by subscribing to print media. Realize that some of what is on the internet is there to harm you. Learn about sites that investigate propaganda campaigns, some of which come from abroad. Take responsibility for what you communicate with others. What is truth? Sometimes people ask this question because they wish to do nothing. Generic cynicism makes us feel hip and alternative even as we slip along with our fellow citizens into a morass of indifference. It is your ability to discern facts that makes you an individual, and our collective trust in common knowledge that makes us a society. The individual who investigates is also the citizen who builds. The leader who dislikes the investigators is a potential tyrant. During his campaign, the president claimed on a Russian propaganda outlet that American media has been unbelievably dishonest. He banned many reporters from his rallies and regularly elicited hatred of journalists from the public. Like the leaders of authoritarian regimes, he promised to suppress freedom of speech by laws that would prevent criticism. Like Hitler, the president used the word lies to mean statements of fact not to his liking, and presented journalism as a campaign against himself. The president was on friendlier terms with the internet, his source for erroneous information that he passed on to millions of people. In 1971, contemplating the lies told in the United States about the Vietnam War, the political theorist Hannah Arendt took comfort in the inherent power of facts to overcome falsehoods in a free society. Under normal circumstances, the liar is defeated by reality, for which there is no substitute, No matter how large the tissue of falsehood that an experienced liar has to offer, it will never be large enough, even if he enlists the help of computers to cover the immensity of factuality. The part about computers is no longer true. In the 2016 presidential election, the two-dimensional world of the internet was more important than the three-dimensional world of human contact. People going door to door to canvass encountered the surprised blinking of American citizens who realized that they would have to talk about politics with a flesh-and-blood human being rather than having their views affirmed by their Facebook feeds. Within the two-dimensional internet world, new collectivities have arisen, invisible by the light of day, tribes with distinct worldviews, beholden to manipulations. And yes, there is a conspiracy that you can find online. It is the one to keep you online, looking for conspiracies. We need print journalists so that stories can develop on the page and in our minds. What does it mean, for example, that the president says that women belong at home, that pregnancy is an inconvenience, that mothers do not give 100% at work, that women should be punished for having abortions, that women are slobs, pigs, or dogs, and that it is permissible to sexually assault them? What does it mean that 6 of the president's companies have gone bankrupt, and that the president's enterprises have been financed by mysterious infusions of cash from entities in Russia and Kazakhstan? We can learn these things on various media. When we learn them from a screen, however, we tend to be drawn in by the logic of spectacle. When we learn of one scandal, it whets our appetite for the next. Once we subliminally accept that we are watching a reality show rather than thinking about real life, no image can actually hurt the president politically. Reality television must become more dramatic with each episode. If we found a video of the president performing Cossack dances while Vladimir Putin claps, we would probably just demand the same thing with the president wearing a bear suit and holding rubles in his mouth. Make eye contact and small talk. This is not just polite. It is part of being a citizen and a responsible member of society. It is also a way to stay in touch with your surroundings, break down social barriers, and understand whom you should and should not trust. If we enter a culture of denunciation, you will want to know the psychological landscape of your daily life. Tyrannical regimes arose at different times and places in the Europe of the 20th century. But memoirs of their victims all share a single tender moment. Whether the recollection is of fascist Italy in the 1920s, of Nazi Germany of the 1930s, of the Soviet Union during the Great Terror of 1937 to 38, or of the purges in communist Eastern Europe in the 1940s and 50s, people who were living in fear of repression remembered how their neighbors treated them. A smile, a handshake, or a word of greeting, banal gestures in a normal situation, took on great significance. When friends, colleagues, and acquaintances looked away or crossed the street to avoid contact, fear grew. You might not be sure today or tomorrow who feels threatened in the United States. But if you affirm everyone, you can be sure that certain people will feel better. In the most dangerous of times, those who escape and survive generally know people whom they can trust. Having old friends is the politics of last resort, and making new ones is the first step toward change. Practice corporeal politics. Después, power wants your body softening in your chair and your emotions dissipating on the screen. Get outside. Put your body in unfamiliar places with unfamiliar people. Make new friends and march with them. For resistance to succeed, 2 boundaries must be crossed. First, ideas about change must engage people of various backgrounds who do not agree about everything. Second, people must find themselves in places that are not their homes, and among groups who were not previously their friends. Protest can be organized through social media, but nothing is real that does not end on the streets. If tyrants feel no consequences for their actions in the three-dimensional world, nothing will change. The one example of successful resistance to communism was the Solidarity labor movement in Poland in 1980–81. A coalition of workers and professionals, elements of the Roman Catholic Church, and secular groups. Its leaders had learned hard lessons under communism. In 1968, the regime mobilized workers against students who protested. In 1970, when a strike in Gdansk on the Baltic coast was bloodily suppressed, it was the workers' turn to feel isolated. In 1976, however, intellectuals and professionals formed a group to assist workers who had been abused by the government. These were people from both the right and the left, believers and atheists, who created trust among workers, people whom they would not otherwise have met. When Polish workers on the Baltic coast went on strike again in 1980, they were joined by lawyers, scholars, and others who helped them make their case. The result was the creation of a free labor union, as well as government guarantees to observe human rights. During the 16 months that Solidarity was legal, 10 million people joined, and countless new friendships were created amid strikes, marches, and demonstrations. The Polish communist regime put down the movement with martial law in 1981. Yet 8 years later, in 1989, when they needed negotiating partners, the communists had to turn to Solidarity. The labor union insisted on elections, which it then won. This was the beginning of the end of communism in Poland, Eastern Europe, and the Soviet Union. Contribute to good causes. Be active in organizations, political or not, that express your own view of life. Pick a charity or two and set up autopay. Then you will have made a free choice that supports civil society and helps others to do good. It is gratifying to know that, whatever the course of events, you are helping others to do good. Many of us can afford to support some part of the vast network of charities that one of our former presidents called 1,000 points of light. Those points of light are best seen, like stars at dusk, against a darkening sky. When Americans think of freedom, we usually imagine a contest between a lone individual and a powerful government. We tend to conclude that the individual should be empowered and the government kept at bay. This is all well and good, but one element of freedom is the choice of associates, and one defense of freedom is the activity of groups to sustain their members. This is why we should engage in activities that are of interest to us, our friends, our families. These need not be expressly political. Václav Havel, the Czech dissident thinker, gave the example of brewing good beer. Insofar as we take pride in these activities and come to know others who do so as well, we are creating civil society. Sharing in an undertaking teaches us that we can trust people beyond a narrow circle of friends and families, and helps us to recognize authorities from whom we can learn. The capacity for trust and learning can make life seem less chaotic and mysterious, and democratic politics more plausible and attractive. The anti-communist dissidents of Eastern Europe, facing a situation more extreme than ours, recognized the seemingly non-political activity of civil society as an expression and a safeguard of freedom. They were right. In the 20th century, all the major enemies of freedom were hostile to non-governmental organizations, charities, and the like. Communists required all such groups to be officially registered and transformed them into institutions of control. Fascists created what they called a corporatist system, in which every human activity had its proper place, subordinated to the party state. Today's authoritarians, in India, Turkey, Russia, are also highly allergic to the idea of free associations and non-governmental organizations. Learn from peers in other countries. Keep up your friendships abroad, or make new friends in other countries. The present difficulties in the United States are an element of a larger trend, and no country is going to find a solution by itself. Make sure you and your family have passports. In the year before the president was elected, American journalists were often mistaken about his campaign. As he surmounted barrier after barrier and accumulated victory after victory, our commentariat assured us that at the next stage, he would be stopped by one fine American institution or another. There was, meanwhile, one group of observers who took a different position: East Europeans, and those who study Eastern Europe. To them, much about the president's campaign was familiar, and the final outcome was no surprise. Ukrainian and Russian journalists who sniffed the air in the Midwest said more realistic things than American pollsters who had built careers on understanding the politics of their own country. On February 24, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine in a major escalation of the Russo-Ukrainian War, which had started in 2014. The invasion, the largest and deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II, has caused hundreds of thousands of military casualties and tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilian casualties. As of 2025, Russian troops occupy about 20% of Ukraine. From a population of 41 million, about 8 million Ukrainians had been internally displaced, and more than 8.2 million had fled the country by April 2023, creating Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. March 17, 2023. The International Criminal Court issued a warrant of arrest of Vladimir Putin. Putin, President of the Russian Federation, is allegedly responsible for the war crime of unlawful transfer of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. Support the courageous and resilient Ukrainian democratically elected government and democracy-loving people by applying pressure through strongly worded phone calls, emails, and text messages to your congressmen and senators for your unwavering support for the valiant fight by the Ukrainian people to retain liberty, autonomy, and independence from Russia, and to challenge the Trump administration's attempts to inexplicably appease and reward Russian President Vladimir Putin's bellicose imperialism by threatening to cease financial, intelligence, and military armament in order to extort an expedient but unjust resolution for the Ukrainians. To Ukrainians, Americans seemed comically slow to react to the obvious threats of cyber war and fake news. When Russian propaganda made Ukraine a target in 2013, young Ukrainian journalists and others reacted immediately, decisively, and sometimes humorously with campaigns to expose disinformation. Russia deployed many of the same techniques against Ukraine that it later used against the United States while invading Ukraine. When Russian media falsely claimed in 2014 that Ukrainian troops crucified a small boy, the Ukrainian response was rapid and effective, at least within Ukraine itself. When Russian media spread the story in 2016 that Hillary Clinton was ill because she mentioned an article on decision fatigue in an email, the story was spread by Americans. The Ukrainians won, and the Americans lost, in the sense that Russia failed to get the regime it wanted in its neighbor, but did see its preferred candidate triumph in the United States. This should give us pause. History, which for a time seemed to be running from west to east, now seems to be moving from east to west. Everything that happens here seems to happen there first. The fact that most Americans do not have passports has become a problem for American democracy. Sometimes Americans say that they do not need travel documents because they prefer to die defending freedom in America. These are fine words, but they miss an important point. The fight will be a long one. Even if it does require sacrifice, it first demands sustained attention to the world around us, so that we know what we are resisting and how best to do so. So having a passport is not a sign of surrender. On the contrary, it is liberating, since it creates the possibility of new experiences. It allows us to see how other people, sometimes wiser than we, react to similar problems. Since so much of what has happened in the last year is familiar to the rest of the world, or from recent history, we must observe and listen. Be calm when the unthinkable arrives. Modern tyranny is terror management. When the terrorist attack comes, remember that authoritarians exploit such events in order to consolidate power. The sudden disaster that requires the end of checks and balances, the dissolution of opposition parties, the suspension of freedom of expression, the right to a fair trial, and so on, is the oldest trick in the Hitlerian book. Do not fall for it. The Reichstag fire was the moment when Hitler's government, which came to power mainly through democratic means, became the menacingly permanent Nazi regime. It is the archetype of terror management. On February 27, 1933, at about 9 p.m., the building housing the German parliament, the Reichstag, began to burn. Who set the fire that night in Berlin? We don't know, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is that this spectacular act of terror initiated the politics of emergency. Gazing with pleasure at the flames that night, Hitler said, "This fire is just the beginning." Whether or not the Nazis set the fire, Hitler saw the political opportunity. There will be no mercy now. Anyone standing in our way will be cut down. The next day, a decree suspended the basic rights of all German citizens, allowing them to be preventively detained by the police. On the strength of Hitler's claim that the fire was the work of Germany's enemies, the Nazi Party won a decisive victory in parliamentary elections on March 5th. The police and the Nazi paramilitaries began to round up members of left-wing political parties and place them in improvised concentration camps. On March 23rd, the new parliament passed an enabling act, which allowed Hitler to rule by decree. Germany then remained in a state of emergency for the next 12 years, until the end of the Second World War. Hitler had used an act of terror, an event of limited inherent significance, to institute a regime of terror that killed millions of people and changed the world. The authoritarians of today are also terror managers, and if anything, they are rather more creative. Consider the current Russian regime, so admired by the president. Vladimir Putin not only came to power in an incident that strikingly resembled the Reichstag fire, he then used a series of terror attacks, real, questionable, and fake, to remove obstacles to total power in Russia and to assault democratic neighbors. Be a patriot. Set a good example of what America means for the generations to come. They will need it. What is patriotism? Let us begin with what patriotism is not. It is not patriotic to dodge the draft and to mock war heroes and their families. It is not patriotic to discriminate against active duty members of the armed forces in one's companies, or to campaign to keep disabled veterans away from one's property. It is not patriotic to compare one's search for sexual partners in New York with the military service in Vietnam that one has dodged. It is not patriotic to avoid paying taxes, especially when American working families do pay. It is not patriotic to ask those working, tax-paying American families to finance one's own presidential campaign and then to spend their contributions in one's own companies. It is not patriotic to admire foreign dictators. It is not patriotic to cultivate a relationship with Muammar Gaddafi, or to say that Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin are superior leaders. It is not patriotic to call upon Russia to intervene in an American presidential election. It is not patriotic to cite Russian propaganda at rallies. It is not patriotic to share an advisor with Russian oligarchs. It is not patriotic to solicit foreign policy advice from someone who owns shares in a Russian energy company. It is not patriotic to read a foreign policy speech written by someone on the payroll of a Russian energy company. It is not patriotic to appoint a national security advisor who has taken money from a Russian propaganda organ. It is not patriotic to appoint as Secretary of State an oilman with Russian financial interests who is the director of a Russian-American energy company and has received the Order of Friendship from Putin. The point is not that Russia and America must be enemies. The point is that patriotism involves serving your own country. The president is a nationalist, which is not at all the same thing as a patriot. A nationalist encourages us to be our worst and then tells us that we are the best. A nationalist, although endlessly brooding on power, victory, defeat, revenge, wrote Orwell, tends to be uninterested in what happens in the real world. Nationalism is relativist, since the only truth is the resentment we feel when we contemplate others. A prescient interview with California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Border Patrol director here, as well as the spokesperson, he made our point. I don't think we had to say a word.
Right.
He made the point we're making. Not only is he rigging the election, he's trying to ruin and wreck democracy. He's no longer even feigning that he has dictatorial tendencies or authoritarian tendencies. He's acting out on them. It was an act of intimidation. It was an act, however, of weakness. Why else would you send them out? How pathetic, how small. And it's a sign of things to come. And I assure you, what you saw today, what happened here today, is going to happen tomorrow in a town near you. My biggest fear, and I said this months ago to you, is that we're going to see the National Guard federalized in other parts of the country. You're starting to see that under different circumstances, subtly in DC. But you're going to see ICE and Border Patrol sent out to polling places and voting booths during the election. This was an act of intimidation, and that's exactly why this initiative is so important. I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like a gun to the head of a 15-year-old disabled boy born in the United States of America that doesn't look like you and me trying to go to school. That's what just happened here in Los Angeles. I'll tell you what it manifests. That kid doesn't, that many other people saw that, they may not send their kids to school. It means people are not showing up in their classroom. People are not showing up to get their flu shot at the emergency room, or people that are sick not even accessing emergency care. It means people that may be witnesses of crime not even be willing to go forward to help keep our community safe. It's a chilling effect. People not going out to go grocery shopping or doing so only late at night. People getting into other people's cars that look like you and me to drive them to go shopping so they're not racially profiled if they're driving by the Home Depot or a car wash. And it will happen in more insidious ways if it happens during the election. And that's exactly what this is about. It's about clearing the streets. It's about creating panic. People are not going to sit there in a line where they can't even get water in some states, and they're not going to sit there waiting 2 or 3 hours if ICE or Border Patrol shows up. It's precisely, again, why people need to wake up and disabuse themselves that democracy is going to survive if we do not push back. It won't. It's the rule of dawn, no longer the rule of law. And people need to understand the lines that are being redrawn in Texas are not about party, they're about power. And you've got to meet fire with fire, and power needs to be asserted in blue states, not just red states. Our state of mind has to be more firm, more resolved, and more aggressive. Gratitude to J.B. Pritzker for recognizing the urgency of the moment, for hosting the Texas delegation. Deep gratitude to the Texas delegation for raising the awareness and the stakes that put a lot of wind in our sail, that gave us the ability to make the case to our legislature. But now it's time to act. Now it's time to take it to the next step. And it's not just those two that have already demonstrated a commitment on this. It's many other states. There are a lot of other blue states out there. Let's go. Like, I mean, this is it. There's no dress rehearsal. There's not, I mean, this guy is going after any institution that cultivates independent thought. He's rewriting history in real time at the Smithsonian. He's literally going after institutions of higher learning like the UC system, and notably here, UCLA, which is doing life-saving research that literally is protecting our national security. It's the reason we're the economic tentpole of the American economy and the world economy in the United States of America as a beneficiary. This guy is wrecking it all in real time. We need to wake up. We cannot survive if he rigs not just Texas, but he goes to Indiana, goes to Missouri, goes to Ohio, he goes to Florida. We have to have other governors of like mind, and there are many, to now do something, not just say something. We're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our founding fathers. Co-equal branches of government, popular sovereignty, rule of law. You were spot on. Everything you just said is spot on. This is it. And I mean, at what point, there's literally no more evidence than you need than the evidence that has been submitted in the first 6.5, 7 months of the Trump administration. And you think this is going to get better? You think if we just say, well, Mr. Trump, it's fine. You know, we know it's a race to the bottom. You know, you may call upon those other states. Can you just do 5 and California will stand down?
Yeah.
God damn it, enough.
Yeah.
Democrats, stop being weak. Step up. These guys have been dominating the narrative. They have been defining the terms of the debate. It's time to get on our off our heels, onto our front toes. It's time to do just that. Dominate the narrative, flood the zone, and surround sound. It's time for us to all band together. It is about the United States of America. He doesn't believe in that. He believes in the red states. He's going after, he's a war. He's a wartime president. He's the head of a war party. War on women, war on voting rights, war on Hispanics, a war on this state, war on institutions, war on history. I mean, this is serious. This guy's trying to get a Nobel Peace Prize. That's what he's going to try to say tomorrow in Alaska, that he's the big guy trying to find peace, really? When he's bringing war to the American people? He put military in the streets, not of Baghdad, and he didn't send the military in his first administration anywhere in the world. He sent the United States Marines into the United States of America in one of the bluest cities in this country, in Los Angeles, one of the great cities, American cities. That's what Donald Trump did. He is a wartime president. Good government when government is totally eliminated. It's no longer the rule of law, back to this notion of rule of dawn. I mean, the League of Women Voters thinks that by aligning with Donald Trump, that's all they're doing. It's a binary. It's not complicated. Right. By aligning with Donald Trump, the League of Women Voters thinks that's good government. When he doesn't believe in independent redistricting, he's going to eliminate independent redistricting. He doesn't believe in advise and consent. He doesn't believe in the power of co-equal branches of government and oversight. When he's trying to rig the election, when he's trying to change the rules by playing against with a brand new set of rules in the mid-decade on the redistricting, give me a break. With all due respect to them, they are dead wrong on this issue.
Love it. Right.
I have no answers for the supposed fake media about California's beautiful, big, beautiful maps. People are saying that we're the greatest maps. They're just saying this. They are, Brian. People are saying the greatest maps
Many people have heard that.
ever created. Even better than Christopher Columbus's. Donald the failure Trump, be warned that tomorrow may be the worst day of your life, all because you missed the deadline. He misses a lot of deadlines. Liberation Day for America, GCN. I should have said thank you for your attention to this matter. Off, man. Just gloves off. It's all on the line. It's it. Like enough. You know. You're wearing a tie, took my tie off, took the tie off.
That's right.
Like it's it. Don't dream of regretting. I said that, this is not no do-over. This is it. Wake up to what's going on in this country. And I'll iterate, I'll try anything. That's what that represents. I'm just trying to break through, man. I'm just trying to be accountable, to be able to look at my kids, said, who woulda, coulda, shoulda, no, that I did everything I could. And you know what? See what fate brings. But we're going to put everything on the damn line. And that's, why I'm proud of the folks from Texas. And that's why I'm proud of folks showing up at the No Kings rally. People haven't given up yet. Yeah. I'm telling you, we can win. We're going to do this. We can win this November. We can win next November. And then we can get this country back on track. And I tell you, I took it for granted. I did. Even during Trump 1.0, I took so much for granted. And people ask all the time, well, do you think, authoritarians here? Is that, well, not yet for me, but sure as hell for the people walking on the streets that look different from me. And now I even wonder if you got these big corporate titans that are selling their soul.
Yeah.
Maybe it's come for them as well. Nationalizing, taking 15% of their profits. Behavior, crony capitalism.
Yeah. Writing
big checks, maybe buying crypto. I mean, the greatest grift in American history, billions and billions of dollars. I mean, this is sick. This is sick. This is sick. This cannot continue. And if institutions like Harvard are going to sell their soul, then we need to do more. And we have to call this out. This is, I don't want to overstate it, but I can't understate how important November 4th is. And that's why I call it Liberation Day here in California. This is it, man. If we roll over, we fail. Fourth largest economy in the world, size of 21 state populations combined. If we can't, in the most un-Trump state, push back, I don't know what's going to happen in 3 years. This guy will run again. This initiative is about giving you power. The power to stop Donald Trump, the power to push back against rigged elections, the power to have a national election that's fair. It's the power to push back. And that power is about showing up. We exist by the consent of the people. This is it. This is it. So we need people, to the extent you can, to contribute, let folks know what's at stake. This is not about California's 5 seats. This is about representation across this country. And things that you see on your TV that are happening here in LA, again, I cannot impress upon you more, are previews of things to come in your backyard unless we stand up and push back.
Join us. Find a way to get in the way and make good trouble.